Hey class. This week I'm going to be reading you a story each day. So hopefully you like it. These stories all have one thing in common. They are narrative nonfiction stories, which means they tell about something or someone that is true in a story form. For example, this story that we're going to read today, The Boo Boos That Changed the World, it is a true story about an accidental invention. And so this story is about a real person, and that real person invented the band aid by accident. But how the author tells the story might not exactly be what happened. And so that's why it is a narrative nonfiction, because it's about something that is true. But the way that they're telling the story, the way the author is telling the story, it is to amuse you and to make you like the story and to make you enjoy it, but also they are informing you and telling you about something that is true that has happened in the past. So, like I said, this is a narrative nonfiction story, and it's kind of fun and exciting. And I'm going to read it to you, and you can follow along on your screen, and you can also see Miss Hughes read it to you, which is kind of cool. Um, and and yeah, so this week's all about narrative nonfiction stories. So that's why every day I'm going to read a story that's like this one. There's nothing I want you to do with it. You don't have to take a quiz. You don't have to write about it. I just want you to enjoy listening to a narrative nonfiction story. Okay, so like I said, this story is called The Boo Boos That Changed the World. Uh-oh. Okay. Once upon a time in 1917, actually, a cotton buyer named Earl Dixon married his beloved Josephine, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Actually, that was just the beginning. The newlyweds expected to live a quiet life in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Instead, Earl and Josephine ended up changing the world, one boo boo at a time. You see, Josephine was accident prone. She often bumped and bruised herself while working around the house, but that was nothing compared to how often she injured herself in the kitchen. Ouch! When she sliced the dice of onion, she sometimes sliced her finger too. Boo hoo! When she grated cheese, she sometimes grated her knuckle. Arg! When she lifted a hot pot off the stove, she sometimes burned her hand. After Josephine winced in pain, she quickly grabbed a rag to stop the bleeding. But with bulky towels between her fingers, it was even harder for Josephine to hold a knife. She became even more accident prone. Impossible, you say? It's true. Josephine's klutziness had become a bloody problem. Every night, when Earl came home from work, he looked forward to talking with Josephine and eating the wonderful meals she had prepared. That was until he saw his beloved's hands. Yikes! Her cuts might get infected. He had to help his new bride. Earl's father was a doctor, so Earl knew a little bit about boo boos and bandages. And luckily, he worked for a company that manufactured hospital supplies. Earl knew there had to be a solution. But what was it? Earl thought he might Earl thought while he shaved in the morning, maybe if I Earl thought when he while he bought cotton in the afternoon. Then I could And Earl thought some more while he lay in bed at night. And that would solve. Finally, a light bulb went off in his head. I've got it! Earl yelled with excitement, waking Josephine. What have you got? She asked. The bloody solution, of course, Earl replied. The next morning, Earl tried out his idea. Step 1. He took a long piece of adhesive tape and laid it on the kitchen table, sticky side up. Step 2. Earl cut small squares and sterilized gauze and stuck them on the tape every few inches. Step 3. He placed a material called crinoline on top of the adhesive tape to keep the whole strip sterile. It's perfect, Earl said proudly. Now all Josephine had to do was cut off a piece of the longer strip and put it on. She didn't need anybody's help. She needed only one hand. It worked! At last, they lived happily ever after. The end. But wait! Here comes the part about how Earl and Josephine changed the whole world. Earl guessed that there were probably hundreds, possibly even thousands of people who could benefit from his new invention. Earl and Josephine thought about making the bandages themselves. As soon as they realized it was too big of a job, Earl told one of his coworkers about it, and the coworker encouraged Earl to meet with his company's president. At first, Earl's boss, James Johnson, wasn't quite sure Earl's idea was good enough. Earl demonstrated how easy it was to put the bandage on. Then Mr. Johnson saw his own light bulb. The company agreed to produce and sell the product. They combined the words bandage and first aid to create the clever name Band-Aid. Now, Earl and Josephine would surely live happily ever after because Band-Aids were guaranteed to be an instant success. And with that, we have come to the end. Thank you and good night. Haha, just kidding. Oops, not yet, sorry. The first year, Band-Aids were made in a factory. It was a slower than slow process, and only a small number could be manufactured by hand. They came rolled up and were 18 ridiculous inches long and 3 ridiculous inches wide, and they still had to be cut into pieces. Earl, Josephine, and Mr. Johnson had high expectations, but the Band-Aid boxes collected dust, ignored, and unwanted. Why do you think they were unwanted? You're right, they were unwanted because they were too long and you had to cut it all by yourself. A few years later, the company invented a machine that could mass produce thousands of bandages. Instead of the users having to cut them, each one was ready to go on its own. Band-Aids were now about 3 inches long and an inch wide, and they were cute too. Each one had a little red string to pull in order to open the paper wrapper, kind of like what we have right now. Success! Band-Aids flew off the shelves. The end. Not quite yet. Not really. Unfortunately, even with the cute red string and the convenient size, the public wasn't sold on the idea. Mr. Johnson knew there had to be a solution. What happened next was truly a stroke of genius. The company decided to give the Band-Aids away. Mr. Johnson wondered who needed self-adhesive bandages the most. And then the light bulb went off again. The Boy Scouts, of course. All those fall down, climb up, scratched elbows, scraped knees boys got plenty of cuts. It didn't take long before the mothers of those rough and tumble boys saw how handy these little bandages were. They did it! Earl and Josephine's invention was a smash. During World War II, the company sent millions of free Band-Aids to the brave soldiers fighting overseas. In the years that followed, Band-Aids were made in different sizes, colors, and designs. Some even had pictures of cartoon characters on them. And that continues to this day all over the world. From boisterous hot dog vendors in Brooklyn, fancy French winemakers, tired taxi drivers in Denmark, and English bobbies on bicycles, to daredevil skateboarders, king crab fishermen in Alaska, sweaty Ugandan soccer players, and applauding audiences at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, the sounds of "Ai! Wah!" and "Ouch!" echoed still, but not for long. Because soon those snivels and snobs of pain are silenced by Earl and Josephine's accidental boo-boo invention, and that is the happiest ending of all. The end. Really. All right. So that was the story of how the Band-Aid got invented by accident. But like I said, this was a nonfiction narrative. So the way that they told the story wasn't exactly how it went. It was just a way to entertain you, to give you the ideas and some of the facts. And so here's exactly um, or here's some more facts about how it happened. So the author said, "We don't know exactly what Earl and Josephine said when Earl first figured out his idea for a ready-made bandage. I invented the dialogue, which means the talking in the story, and details surrounding their invention in this book. The Band-Aid is one of those little inventions that nobody thinks about much. You stick one on, you go when you get a boo-boo and continue on your way. What is there to ponder? That's a whole lot of involved. There's a whole lot involved. Every invention has a history. Things don't invent themselves, do they? Then who does? And when? And where? And how? Inventions are invented because they fill a need. Such was the case of the Band-Aid. Josephine needed an easy way to stop the bleeding on her fingers and to make sure her cuts didn't get infected. So Earl combined several ideas that resulted in the invention of the Band-Aid, a bandage that anyone could do, that could put on themselves. So it's kind of the same thing. And right here, if you wanted to look more, this is the exact Earl Dickinson timeline, like his life, the inventor of the Band-Aid. So it shows the timeline of that. But tomorrow I'm going to read another narrative story that is maybe not about an invention, but could be something else that's true in life. And it's written like a story to entertain you. Hope you enjoyed it. Love you guys. Miss you.